Have you ever wondered what happened after the dust settled on the battlefield? What became of the families left behind, especially the wives of the defeated warriors? Today, we delve into a dark and often overlooked chapter of history, the fate of women in the aftermath of Ottoman conquests. While the phrase "worse than death" might sound like a sensational headline for many women in this era, the reality that followed a lost battle was a complex and often harrowing ordeal that stripped them of their identity, freedom, and everything they held dear. The moment a city or a fortress fell to the Ottoman armies, the lives of its inhabitants were irrevocably altered. According to the customs of the time, a practice not unique to the Ottomans, but certainly perfected by them, the defeated population, including women and children, were considered spoils of war. This wasn't just a chaotic frenzy. It was a systematized process. For the wives of noblemen and commanders, the fall from grace was swift and brutal. One moment they were ladies of high society, the next they were captives, their fates resting entirely in the hands of their conquerors. Their ordeal often began with a forced march. Torn from their homes, they were herded along with other captives, often 400s of miles, towards the heart of the empire. These journeys were perilous, marked by exhaustion and despair. Many did not survive. For those who did, their arrival in cities like Istanbul wasn't a reprieve, but the beginning of a new, uncertain life. They were paraded and sold in slave markets. Imagine the sheer terror and humiliation being appraised like livestock, your worth reduced to physical appearance or potential skills. For a woman who had known only privilege, this was a psychological blow from which many never recovered. The most coveted of these women were destined for the Sultan's harem. Now, the word harem often conjures up exotic and romanticized images, but the reality was far from it. The harem was a gilded cage, a highly structured and fiercely competitive institution. It was a prison of velvet and gold. Upon entering, a woman's past was erased. She was given a new name, converted to Islam, and began a rigorous education in Turkish language, culture, and court etiquette. Her entire identity was systematically dismantled and rebuilt to serve the dynasty. Life inside the harem was a constant struggle for position and influence. The ultimate goal was to catch the Sultan's eye and bear him a son. This was the only path to real power and security. The mother of a potential heir, or Hossaki Sultan, gained immense prestige. But this was a high-stakes game. Rivalries between concubines were intense and could be deadly. They vied for favor, spied on each other, and navigated a complex web of alliances with eunuchs and court officials. The pressure was immense. Failure to produce a male heir, or falling out of favor, meant being relegated to the old palace, a place of retirement for forgotten concubines, where they would live out the rest of their days in obscurity. This slow social death, this fading into nothingness after being at the center of power, was for many a fate more agonizing than a swift end. However, not all captive women ended up in the Sultan's harem. The vast majority were sold to high-ranking Ottoman officials, pashas, beys, and wealthy merchants. Their lives in these private households varied greatly. Some were treated with a degree of respect, especially if they bore children for their masters. Their sons could be born free, and the mothers themselves could eventually gain their freedom upon their master's death. This was known as the status of unwalled, but this was far from guaranteed. Many more endured lives of thankless domestic servitude, their days filled with drudgery and their nights subject to their master's whims. They were property, with no legal rights or recourse. Their connection to their past, their children from a previous life, their religion, and their homeland was severed forever. This complete loss of self is perhaps what makes their fate worse than death. Death is an end. But for these women, it was a perpetual state of non-existence. They lived as ghosts of their former selves, in a world where they were no longer wives, mothers, or individuals, but possessions. They were forced to serve the very people who had destroyed their families and their world. They had to raise their new children within the culture of their conquerors, sometimes knowing their own sons from their previous life were either dead or enslaved elsewhere. The psychological torment of such an existence is hard for us to fully comprehend today. It's also crucial to remember that this was not a uniform experience. Some women, through sheer force of will, intelligence, and a bit of luck, managed to navigate this treacherous new world and carve out a measure of influence. The famous story of Hurrem Sultan, also known as Roxolana, is a prime example. Captured in a raid, she rose from being a nameless slave to become the legal wife of Suleiman the Magnificent, one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. But her story is the exception that proves the rule. For every Hurrem Sultan, there were thousands whose names are lost to history, whose stories ended in silent suffering and anonymity. Their legacy is a silent one, woven into the very fabric of the Ottoman Empire. The genetic and cultural makeup of the empire was profoundly shaped by this constant influx of people from conquered lands. These women, torn from their homes in the Balkans, the Caucasus, and across Europe, brought with them their traditions, their knowledge, and their resilience, which subtly influenced the society that had enslaved them. But this was an influence born of tragedy. It doesn't erase the profound personal loss and suffering each individual woman endured. So, when we look back at the grand tapestries of history, at the rise and fall of empires, it's vital to look beyond the battles and the great men. We must remember the silent figures in the background, the women whose lives were shattered and remained in the crucible of conquest. Their story is not one of glory, but of survival against impossible odds. It is a sobering reminder that the price of empire is often paid by the most vulnerable, and that for many living through the aftermath of defeat was indeed a fate more complex and in many ways more cruel than death itself. Thank you for joining us on this journey into a less-known aspect of history. If you found this topic insightful, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell for more deep dives into the past. Let us know in the comments what piece of hidden history you'd like us to explore next. Until next time, stay curious,